Nicki Amouri, hi.
Hi.
Welcome to the SCA and to this Rate of Rise live interview. I'm really excited to talk to you.
I'm excited to be here. Thank
Yeah,
you.
you did such a great job presenting on roast curves and just zeroing in on the technical aspects of your roasting technology at the Roast Summit. So I'm excited to dive into this topic. For those of you that don't know, Nicki Amouri is a Q grader, coffee expert, wholesale manager, probably a little bit of everything
That's
at
right.
Amouri Coffee Roasters in Virginia, right?
That's correct.
Yes, Vienna, Virginia.
A little bit of everything.
Nice. That's what we tend to do in coffee. We just take on a lot of roles.
That is so true. Yes.
Well, we're going to talk about something pretty specific here, and it's really just focused on roast curves. And it feels like one of those topics that like you kind of know if you just get into coffee, you could say, well, it's supposed to go down and up and then down. There's this arch I'm supposed to see, and then I have good coffee at the end. But there's way more to it. And the way you can master your roast curve, you can master your coffee, right? Like if you can combine what you're seeing with what you're tasting. So let me ask you this. How have you, with all of your experience over the years, understood roast curves? And I mean, from where you were till today, like how did you first interpret like what you were doing with roast curves? And then now, what do you do and how is that different?
So, I started with a very, basic understanding, as probably all roasters do. And I think, honestly, I think that's where you need to start, or else you just get completely overwhelmed and you'd probably quit, your first day of roasting if you knew everything that really goes into roasting and figuring out how to make the best curve. So I've started with a basic understanding of just, probably the big events on a roast curve. So obviously the color change is a visible thing you see, and then the first crack is what you hear, and then ending the roast, right? So started there. And then I took roasting classes. I got my SCA Roaster Level 1.
Okay.
And there they go into more detail, obviously, about the roast curves, and especially about the phases, the roast phases. So, the drying phase, and then the Maillard phase, and then the development phase. So kind of breaking it down into phases and what they're each all about, made it a little more nuanced and detailed for me. And then just as I started roasting more and more, and just seeing the data in front of me. So I roast on a Dietrich IR12.
Okay.
And there's something called a rate of rise curve, right? That's what the show's named after.
Hey.
Yeah. So super important. And you look at this data and you're like, I should be breaking this down, analyzing that part too. I'm sure it's important somehow. So adding that into the mix and looking at the peak rate of rise and that being an important part of the roast curve. And then, today I still feel like I'm learning. I don't feel like I've completely mastered the roast curve. I do think that there are parts on the curve that are still not even quantifiable, that are probably, really influencing your roast, and you can't put a number to it or even a name to it, but it's influencing your roast. And so those are the things I still think about, about the roast curve.
Okay, so how many years has it been for you as a roaster?
About 8 years.
Okay, and so let me ask then, with looking at what you're seeing on the roast curve, and then your assessment of what the product tastes like, how do you now take that information and make educated changes to your coffees based on what you're tasting? And then so now you say, oh, well, I see it tasted like this and it looked like that, so I'm going to make a change. So like, what does that look like for you?
Yeah. So, and by the way, it's only been recently that I feel like I've actually reached the point where I can do that.
Okay.
So, if it, like, say I taste a coffee and it tastes kind of, let's say, really like sharply acidic, kind of like tart, I guess you could say, or even dry. I might go back to assess the drying phase and look at, did my roast go too fast in the beginning? And probably did somewhere. Either it turned around too high, or it the peak rate of rise was too high. And then I can say, if it was at like a 38 or something, 38 degrees rise per minute, I can say, well, I got to lower that some, or at least try. And it's a guess. It's all kind of guessing, but maybe I'll try a 34 degree rise per minute instead and see, and then taste that. And then, if it's not quite as tart or dry or something, and then I'll know, that's what, that's the tweak that I can make.
Sure. Sure. Okay. So, and then you say it's a guess, in a lot of ways. However, you have a lot of intuition.
Sure.
Over the years. So each roaster's environment gives them a certain knowledge about, the air that they're using to cool the coffee, like the coffee roaster itself, you as the roaster, and all of that ecosystem of roasting. Like it's a guess, but it's actually a pretty educated guess, right? At this point for you.
Yes, I would definitely say it's an educated guess. It's something I can anticipate for sure. I say guess because honestly, sometimes I'll think it's about the turnaround, or it's about the yellowing time, or even about first crack, and then I'll taste it expecting something, and it won't be what I expected. That still happens quite often. So it's humbling. It's super humbling, and I still get surprised all the time.
Okay, so it's not just about learning, but it's also unlearning.
Yeah.
So
sure.
you've developed some assumptions because in an experiment it actually worked really well, but then the next time you tried it, it doesn't actually work the way and then you're like, man, I thought I had it.
And again, it could have been an unknown variable, one that I haven't even discovered yet, or no one's discovered yet. That's the awesome thing about coffee roasting and curves, is it could have been what I expected it to be, or it could have been like this unknown variable, and
Yeah. Okay. So there's a lot of, I want to ask how interpreting the roasting curve and all the data that's associated with making these quality decisions impacts how you select coffees. So when you look at your history and you look in your logs back in time, at what point do you say, well, we like coffees that behave this way in the roasting process? As I can see on the screen, it shows me how they behaved. We want to select coffees that behave that way. Have you ever thought in terms of green sourcing, like according to what you can knock out of the park, or is it always just sort of like an experiment?
I like that question. Wouldn't say I pick a coffee based on knowing I can roast it. In fact, it's always kind of been the other way. Because we used to buy washed, we buy washed coffees, natural coffees, honey coffees. And then recently we started buying anaerobic fermentation. And I had never roasted anaerobic fermentation. I didn't know what I was in for, but
Right.
You just got to do a first roast and see how it comes out, and then start tweaking it. So that's kind of how it goes. I don't really go in expecting I don't usually pick a green coffee based on knowing I can nail it or something.
Okay. Yeah. That's good. Yeah. And how do when you're, just to go down the path a little bit more, how do your customers respond to that? And what's the psychology behind, if you're always experimenting, I'm sure that your coffee menu has like standard fare, and then there's experimental on there too, right?
Yeah, well, we have this line of adventure coffees. We call it Adventure Series, which we are rare, award-winning coffees with a story. So they've either, we've deemed them special in some way. So yeah, those are the ones that customers kind of know are unique, different, somewhat experimental. Sure, yeah. In terms of roasting, I don't know if they expect experimental roasts. I'm not really sure. I should ask them. But yeah, those are kind of at least our special coffees. With our main coffees, our washed natural blends, honeys, we sort of stick to a profile that they can expect each time. Right.
And so you kind of know what to expect as the roaster with those coffees, and you then have to really rely on the history that you have with these roast curves that you log, right? When you are like teaching roasting, because I know you do a lot of teaching on this, what are the first things that you advise people to not get too concerned about? Like, there's a lot of things you could get concerned about and get overwhelmed by. What are the things that you shouldn't think are a big deal?
Shouldn't think are a big deal.
Well, I say shouldn't, but maybe things people tend to get really hung up on.
Oh.
But you say,
okay,
it'll work itself out.
That's also, I like that. Times, roast times. I just don't think roasters should get super caught up on roast times in general, and also time to turnaround, time to yellowing, time to first crack. I really think it's much more actually, keeping track of your temperatures. Times are important, but it's really in relation to temperatures and sort of the. Well, it's all. Let me say, it's all dependent kind of on your roaster too. So I think what happens is a lot of roasters hear someone say, "I got a first crack in 9 minutes," so they try and replicate that on their own roaster. When in actuality, it might be that a 10-minute or 11-minute first crack tastes a lot better on their roaster. I think you just, again, it's trial and error on your own machine.
Right. So you have to get to know your own situation, right?
Sure.
So then the opposite side is, what are the things that we should focus on? Like you just mentioned, the development and the temperature and all of that. How does that look practically if I'm roasting? Take me through, if I'm your student and I'm roasting a batch of coffee and I'm looking at the curve. What are what's the cycle from the start to the finish that you're just, how do you coach people to interpret those things that they see, the macros of the roast curve?
Yes. I would, again, I would really want to know what machine they're working on. I think that's probably the most important part, because things really vary machine to machine. So it would be about tasting. So I think, I would want to actually taste one of their, their go-to roast or something and see how it tastes. And then we would really kind of tweak from there. And I would, divide what's important. Obviously, the coffee tasting the way you want it to. In terms of roasting, I just did a talk on this for the Roast Summit, but, reaching a turnaround, having a turnaround goal, having certain goals, of course, is very important. So turnaround temperature, I always have a turnaround temperature goal. I have a peak rate of rise goal.
What are those goals based on?
It's based on tasting, right? Tasting roast on my own machine, right? Yeah. And so on my own machine, I want a Maillard, Maillard time span of, say, 3 minutes or 3.5 minutes or something like that. So I don't. If I was getting something 4 minutes or 5 minutes, I would try and shorten that up. But that's on my own machine again. Or development time. The end part. I strive for minute to a minute and a half, or sometimes 2 minutes for naturals. And again, if it was getting longer than that, I would want to shorten that up. So that's probably where I would start with teaching someone, just to get a good solid roast. Having goals like that, but based on tasting. And
those goals, for somebody who's being trained, and I think this is true about barista work or maybe just life in general, I will live and die by the rules. If I'm ice skating, and I've not been ice skating before, I live on the wall, on the side, right? Until I get a sense of myself. So you have these goals you can start people with, because that it's going to pretty much work out to a good coffee, but maybe not a great coffee, or even more importantly, the coffee they want it to be, or even what the coffee has to offer. So that takes time. How soon do you think the turnaround time is for a new roaster to start focusing on those macro goals with their roast curve and all of the logging they're doing, to find that comfort level with that, so that they can start to make it their own interpretation? Yeah.
I think it probably depends on how much roasting they're doing, first of all. If you do one roast a week, that's going to be really hard to progress. If you're a production roaster, and this is the way I learned, we roast we're a coffee shop, so we do a lot of, what we do is production roasting. So I can do back-to-back roasts. I can do the same origin 1 or 2, even 3 times in one day. So I can, I can get a real sense of how coffee works. It's roasting, it's responding. So I think if you're doing production roasting, you can start doing it pretty immediately. Just as long as you're tasting your roasts and then tweaking, and then going back, making only one change at a time.
Oh, okay.
That's the process I talked about in the talk. But
yeah.
So you taste a roast, you go back and then only change one thing, only one variable. Taste that, and then so that you really know how that change affects the taste of the coffee.
And the more coffee you're roasting, the more changes you can make. Right, like so. If I'm not roasting very often, then it's hard for me. If I'm thinking maybe it could be one of 5 things, but now I've got to wait 5 weeks to make the same kind of tweak that a roaster that's thousands of pounds a week could make in 1 week.
Exactly. So yes. That's sort of the reality, right? It's just a lot of it's dependent on how much just coffee you're roasting in a day or in a week or something. But it helps a lot. Like I said, I could do 3 different profiles of the same Guatemalan lot or origin in a day and be able to taste all 3 of those side by side the next day or 2 days later.
Yeah.
And like say a 6-minute or an 8-minute first crack, a 9-minute first crack, 10-minute first crack, with all the other variables being the exact same.
Yeah.
And then cup those side by side, and then see how they taste different, with just the first crack time being different.
Okay, and that would isolate that thing. It may not be the thing you were wanting it to be. Like you thought, well, if I do this, it will translate to a better cup. Well, now if it's not that variable, it's got to be another one. So now you're back to the drawing board. But at least you've eliminated something in the process. Mm-hmm. The question I have is, when we talk about experimenting, and then we talk about selling coffee to customers who have an expectation built up about our coffee, how do we go about it? Is it just like, let's donate this coffee to employees or to charities, or do we just pass it off I
run into that a lot. I do. I make a change, or honestly a roast will come out way different than I thought it would, just because the green bean temperature was way different than I thought it'd be. This happens a lot. The temperature in my roastery dips or raises, and then it throws my curve off. So I have to decide whether to serve it to customers or make it a donation, right?
Yeah.
Or not use it at all. Honestly, but the owner of my shop says this to me all the time. Customers can't taste slight changes, in a roast. If they're small, they're not going to taste it. They're not like me, that I'm analyzing every little detail, scoring the coffee or something. So it's really okay to give them something that's just slightly off,
Yeah.
But if I think it's really too different or really off, I would probably just donate it.
Yeah. Or now you have your adventure series, but now it's the ultra adventure series.
Yeah.
If you really want to risk it all, go for it.
That's right.
Yeah. Okay, so now in experienced roasters, here's a question, because I think as coffee professionals, we have learned and unlearned so many things, hopefully by the time we're so many years into coffee. But because of that experience of having so many years in coffee, we can start to feel like you know it, pretty well. However, a lot is changing in coffee. You're talking about the anaerobic processes, and even just the quality of the coffee I think it's dramatically improving over the last 10 years. So there is a lot that we still need to learn. How do we get over the hump of saying, we still need to be educated, we still need to learn? I mean, personally speaking, you've been at it for 8 years, and that's a lot. How do you stay away from sort of, I don't know, reaching a plateau personally in terms of your development as a roaster as you see coffee develop?
Yeah, it's hard. It's hard because you do want to keep challenging yourself very much. I think for me, My motto, I guess, is kind of just, it can always be better.
Okay.
So I keep that in my head, and I make sure that I keep experimenting in little ways or big ways, just to challenge myself for it to be better, for the coffee to be better. And then I'll also analyze things like how we brew, grind level, is the grind right? I mean, just every aspect of how the coffee is coming out, making sure it's as best as it could be. So,
well, the feedback loop that you have as a roaster is only as good as the kind of experience your customers have, right? And you have the benefit of not only having customers and wholesale clients, but also baristas that can give you this broad picture to form this one picture. So, I mean, as a roaster, how do you integrate, like if you're going to make a change in the coffee, it sounds like all this we've been talking about sounds like, oh, Nicki is just in the back roasting, tasting coffee, making changes. How much of that feedback that you get from the people who are brewing it all the time, like you're roasting it, how does that factor into the changes you make in the coffee?
Unfortunately, we have great baristas, but I always get feedback. In fact, when I first started as a roaster, the feedback from the baristas was probably a lot more important than it is now, because now they're just kind of I've gotten really good, I guess, so they don't have a lot of feedback at all sometimes. But before, they would tell me when everything tastes the same, Nicki, period. So I would have to just figure out what to do and to fix that. I mean, baristas were super helpful, especially in the beginning. Even customers, and one of the points I wanted to make was even my family. I would take coffee home. I would take profiles home, like 2 or 3, and I would give them to like my spouse and have her taste and have her give me feedback on it. And she's not a big coffee person, but she could tell me something. She's like, all I taste is grass. And or I don't like this one at all. And it wasn't like, a coffee professional giving me feedback, but it was still like super valuable information that I would then have to, think about, and how to improve it, make it better. So I'm really big on getting feedback, especially from coffee people and non-coffee people.
Okay.
Yeah.
So much of what you're talking about is a combination of relying on your experience, other people's experience of the coffee that you roast, and then the data. And a lot of people do get hung up with it has to follow, this particular formula because that's the way they learned it, but that's what success looks like. So it sounds like you've crafted sort of a way of roasting and assessing your roast that's not solely relying on the roast curve itself. It's just a tool that kind of fits in amongst others, right?
Yeah, that's absolutely right.
Okay.
Yeah. It really, the coffee needs to taste good. People need to enjoy it. All people, not just coffee geeks. Most of our customers like, more medium to dark roast, really. Okay. So just listening to people, and then figuring out how to make it happen, and
and then you'll have a history of roast curves that might look different over time, but and I tend to view this kind of like the way people look at the back office, the analytics of Square or Toast or something, and they see the ups and downs of their daily business, right? And if you don't attach that to people and say these numbers represent people,
absolutely,
you won't really be able to interpret it the right way. And so if you don't look at your roast curves that way and say this roast curve doesn't fit, quote unquote, what an industry standard curve or somebody who's big on curves might say, but this coffee tastes amazing and our customers love it, I love it. Yeah. And I guess that's the point, right?
That is definitely the point. Yeah, the customers love it, and really, I have to love it too. Like, you're right. I can't hate it. I can't have them love it and me hate it.
Right.
We both have to like it.
Yeah, and for different reasons, though, too, right? Because you have, maybe you love, like, light roast, anaerobic, whatever, and somebody's grandma is just like, I just want that, Folgers in my cup. Yeah. You know what I mean? And you might not have that as your daily drinker, but it may be like it's a lowercase L love, like I love it for it,
Yeah.
Yeah. Nicki, I really appreciate you joining us here, and I think people should definitely tune into your Roast Summit presentation. It's very well done and good, a lot of great information there. And I think what you've talked about here with roast curves and your approach to them is really heartening, because this is, I mean, it's a relationship with your coffee as much as it is a relationship with people.
Oh, yes. I like how you put that. Yes, very much. And just so you know, I'll have an article coming out in Roast Magazine for the fall issue. So.
Oh, perfect.
Yeah.
We'll look forward to that.
The same topic as the talk. So.
Excellent. Thank you, Nicki.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Chris.